What's up, everybody? It's your girl, Goddess Z, here with another podcast episode for you. I hope everybody has been taking care of themselves, mind, body, and spirit, because that is what it's all about. If either one of those things are out of balance, then we are out of balance. And I say that at the beginning of every episode in hopes that it ignites something in somebody to help to get them along on their healing journey. Okay, so let's get into it. Before I get into today's episode, I always like to get a little business out of the way and do some announcements, let you guys know what's been going on with your girl. So, first and foremost, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, YouTube. I'm trying to think about Substack, all at Holistic and Spiritual AF. That's going to be coming across the screen. So, just in case you want to know how to spell it, as well as I'll always have the links down in the description as well if you want to find other ways to follow me. So, I am definitely out there. This podcast has been going now for almost 2 years. At the end of this year, I'll make 2 years. And it really got started with just my ancestors kind of pushed me, and they were like, go out there and start this podcast and begin to help people by telling them your experience. So this is a personal experience podcast. I do a lot of talking about generational trauma, generational healing, energy healing, and something that I've done recently is I've started to incorporate my tarot readings. Now I do my tarot readings over on TikTok, so if you like that kind of thing, check me out on TikTok and YouTube. But I've actually been starting to do the weekly tarot readings as a part of the podcast as well. So you can get that usually not at the beginning of the week like I do when I do TikTok and YouTube. So if you want it when it's fresh and hot, get it over there. At the end of the week, I turn that into a newsletter as well. So you're getting clarity and insight about your week ahead. Sometimes I do monthly. It's just everything is like really on spirit now. So be sure to follow me in those different places. But I am very excited about the journey of this podcast and what it has grown into. And it all started from listening to my internal world and my ancestors and them telling me to start this podcast. I had no idea what I was doing and why I was doing it, but it grew and it evolved and it now has a lot of purpose. So that's one, all the business of that out of the way. And also some really exciting news is your girl is now a published author, okay? Like straight up self-published author on Amazon, getting sales and reviews for my very first book ever, okay? So it's an ebook and it also has a paperback that is available. So I'm putting that link down in the description, and the title of that is The 5 Stages of Shadow Work. That book actually came out of the last podcast episode. I did that, and most of that speaking, I think a lot of people don't realize that when I do bring these episodes, I don't have a whole lot of notes. Sometimes I'll have things to keep me on track because I go off on spirit. Spirit is flowing through me, and I realized I had so much information that I put out in that episode that my ancestors was like, that should be a book. And then that's literally how that started. Like, I always listen to my ancestors when they're giving me guidance because they haven't steered me wrong. And hell, they done protected me and they've saved me throughout a lot of things. So and sure enough, I did that. It's a small book. It's like a 25-page book, but it's loaded and jam-packed with more in-depth information about the 5 stages of shadow work, like that podcast episode was talking about. So be sure to check that podcast episode out. Be sure to check the link. Support your girl, the 5 stages of shadow work. And we are adding author to the titles. Okay. So grateful for that. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and jump into today's topic. So, last time we talked about the 5 stages of shadow work. It all goes together. This time, we're actually going to be talking about generational trauma. So, I jumped to the healing part of things, but some people may not actually know what we're talking about when we throw around the term generational trauma, generational healing. What is that and what that exactly looks like, and why am I so passionate about it? Um, so first and foremost, I'm going to ask a question. You guys go ahead and put it in the comments down, and I also put it in the questionnaire, the Q&A. What is it that you think that generational trauma is? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory if you've ever experienced any trauma in your life, and it's pretty hard to get to adulthood without experiencing some sort of trauma in your life. But the trauma may not necessarily be coming from your family or your close loved ones. Okay. It's one thing to experience, some sort of a tragedy, maybe losing a friend in a car wreck suddenly, as a teenager. That's a traumatic experience, and it could affect your psyche as well, but it's not something that has been passed down from generation to generation in your family, that has created certain norms, that usually, particularly these families, keep secrets, surrounding that. Okay. So now all of a sudden, nobody's talking about it, nobody's healing it, then nobody's getting any help for it. And they just pass that on to the next generation. And you yourself may have found yourself, acting out some of these tendencies with your children. Okay. It can very, very easily happen. Even if you say, I'm never going to be like my mom, I'm never going to be like my dad, it's very easy to pass down generational trauma to your kids unconsciously if you're not being honest about or talking about the things that have happened to you. So, here is an example of generational trauma. Generational trauma could be witnessing or experiencing violence, neglect or abuse in your home or community, being close to someone who dies by suicide, or being sexually assaulted in childhood. And there's many different other ways that a person can experience generational trauma, but we're just going to kind of focus on these. These are like the main ones that most people who have experienced generational trauma can say, oh yeah, I've experienced that. Okay. So let's just start out with witnessing or experiencing violence. I've got a series on my Substack, on my newsletter, called My Ancestors Raised Me. And it's really my story. It's telling, like, from the very beginning, my earliest memories at like 3 are riddled with trauma. My earliest memories, that is how I came into this earth and understanding, was witnessing very violent scenarios between my mother and father, alcoholism, men treating women a certain way, women having to do things on their own. I mean, I just came in like, what the hell is going on as a little kid? So I witnessed, some of my earliest memories are witnessing violence. Okay. That kind of stuff. And I was 3. Okay. So that was like, it was so traumatic. I was 3 and I remember it. And I remember it as if I can time travel back to it like it was yesterday. Those types of things will completely shift the paradigm of your reality. It will completely shift your psyche and what you think is right and wrong. Okay. At a very early age, when you're supposed to really not be worried about anything except for being nurtured and being loved and being cared for and experiencing and exploring the world and what it has to offer in a safe, controlled environment, to experience and witness violence is very disruptive. And so a person can witness violence so much that it becomes normal to them. It's like, what is life without a little bit of violence in it? You know what I'm saying? And then, of course, we watch certain types of entertainment and we've become desensitized to people getting killed. We've got people getting killed in real life. Okay. Like, this world is off the chain right now. And a lot of people are like, oh, damn, that's too bad. If they even say that and they go on about their day, it's so much trauma that we're experiencing in the world that people are becoming more and more desensitized to violence and to trauma. Okay. So witnessing or experiencing violence is going to create a shift in your reality about what you even think violence is. You may actually experience violence, and that could come in the form of the way that people discipline their children. The way that some people discipline their children is a lot less corporal, where they're not actually putting their hands on their child. And I was raised like that. I was raised by boomers. You know what I'm saying? Baby boomers had a different mindset when it came to that. There was no child abuse and things like that. It was, you get your ass beat, like, and it could be the slightest little thing. It could just be you learning about life, something that somebody could have sat down and talked to you about, and you had gotten the lesson that way. It turned into, you're gonna fear me and I'm gonna beat your ass, and so you run around trying not to get your ass beat all the time. And whereas some people may say that's violent, and you end up growing up like, that's just the way we was raised, and it's really easy for you then to, transfer that to your children, where they're not listening to you, they're not doing what you want them to do, and so you're gonna put a little fear in them. You better cut that out. You want to get your ass whooped, something like that, and you don't even see that there's something wrong with that pattern, and you don't even really know where that came from. All you know is that you are it. hey, that's what they did to me. Like, how is anybody else supposed to know how to parent without going to any classes, other than the way that they were parented? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about generational trauma, okay? And not being honest about what that did to us, how that changed our psyche, or beginning to heal that can cause us to pass that on to the next generation. And then they survive it, right? And then they grow up and they have their kids and they're like, shit, we got our ass beat at home. That's what I'm going to do with mine, and nobody says, let's do something different. You know what? He probably didn't even understand that. Let's talk to him. Or nobody in the family intervenes when something like that is happening and saying, whoa, 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 let's try it a different way. Even to do that in certain families is taboo because somebody looks, how dare you tell me what I can do with my children? So generational trauma is a very loaded subject, and it's so intertwined in our existence, our reality, but most importantly, how we treat the next generation. And so that's why it's generational trauma. Okay, so the first one we talked about, witnessing or experiencing violence. Usually this stuff is going to happen fairly early in your life, or it may be disruptive. Okay, so you may have had a normal life up until a certain point, then all of a sudden, boom, you starting to see and experience all of this violence, which is even more traumatic, and it starts to shift your perception of reality. So the next one is neglect or abuse in your home or community. This is very, very important, especially that last part. So we're going to break that up into two sections. Okay, we're talking about neglect or abuse. So there's different types. There's overt abuse, and it's not just physical. Okay, it can be verbal abuse. Okay, you're not shit. You ain't never gonna amount to nothing. You know what I'm saying? You go sit your ass down. You ain't nothing. Things like that. Really, I feel like verbal and emotional abuse is more damaging than than physical abuse. And that's just me personally. They're all three bad, clearly. But I think that what you say to people, particularly a child, especially when you are the authority figure, can really mess them up. Okay, can really start to for them to have certain thoughts and beliefs about themselves that cause them to behave in alignment with that low vibrational thought process of themselves. So um, those things are very, very damaging. To be abusive also means, of course, physically, but there's neglect. Okay. Now, I didn't experience neglect too much. I experienced emotional neglect, but as my physical needs were met, there was always a roof over my head. There was always food on the table. It may not have been in the beginning everything that I wanted, but I always ate. You know what I'm saying? I had food in the house. At one point, my mom was not making very much money. She was working three jobs. She was doing the best she can. And I know this today, so I don't say this kind of stuff and talk about these generational traumas to like bash my mom and them. It's just that I've gotten to a point of healing where I'm able to talk about it. And I recognize by talking about it, it taps and touches something inside of people because they're not talking about it in their family. People are just pretending that this isn't happening, and then they're acting out in ways. And this is how we continue to pass down the generational trauma. Like, somebody has to be able to have a conversation and get to the other side of healing, to not be arguing and you did this to me and how could you, but really trying to find some sort of healing middle ground where that person who was the abuser may themselves have been abused. So they are acting out only the way that they knew how to act out. And now they pass that down to you, but you are learning a different way. So you are doing something different with your children. So that's the whole point, is so that we can break the cycles of this, not to like bash people and talk shit about our parents. And really, they did the best they could. And I know that today, and I internalize that today because, like I said, my mom was working three jobs. She was working as a secretary. She was working as a at the Goodwill, and then she also was working at GM Motors. Okay, and she was doing the best she could. We still was on food stamps and Section 8 and everything else. And she had three kids that she was raising by herself. And I had been a single mother for a part of my daughter's life, and that shit was hard. So I look at her and I applaud her for being able to make sure that my needs were met, my physical needs were met, because that may have been the most that she could do. But neglect can come in many different forms because I didn't get a lot of emotional support. Okay. There wasn't a lot of, oh, I love you and you're so smart and you can be anything that you want. That neglect to be able to have that will also cause some different kind of, psychological processes and perceptions of reality about yourself. So neglect can come in that form, but it also can come in the form of not having the survival things that you need, not having a roof over your head consistently, not having food on the table consistently. And there's plenty of people that have experienced that, not having adult supervision, not having anybody teach you anything, whether it's because the parent isn't there or because the parent is inebriated in some sort of a way because of drugs or alcohol, or sometimes mental illness as well will cause a person to have feelings about themselves like, um, you always think everybody's going to leave. You always think that, you're not going to have enough. You don't know how to express and show love to somebody else. And so you then do the same thing. You may provide food and a roof over your children's head and clothes on their back and things like that, but you don't tell them you love them. You're not engaged in them emotionally because you don't know how, because the person who raised you wasn't that type of person. And so you pass that down to your child, and now your child may have some of the same feelings. So neglect is very important. I'm going to put abandonment in there too, because I've encountered a few people who've discussed like abandonment is a really big issue. If you've been abandoned as a child where your parent just was unavailable, and that can be emotionally unavailable as well, just kind of there, but not really involved in you at all, that can cause people to have trust issues with the world as well as feel like everybody's going to leave them, or they may have, some sort of disdain towards the one gender or another, whether it was the father or the mother that abandoned them. And so they may go to carry out that same type of behavior where they then abandon their children too, emotionally or physically. So all of these things, and that's why I say generational trauma, because this can get passed down from generation to generation. When I talk about the the energy that's stored in our DNA. I always talk about the fact that we have a computer database inside of our DNA that is comprised of all the ancestral information. It's almost like our body is a high-tech computer system, but way more advanced and way more complex, that stores all the energy, all the information from our ancestors. So if we talk and go back to the trauma that some of our ancestors who were brought over here and enslaved from Africa that they experienced, and some of the ones who were indigenous and free over here and thrown into plantations, and the ones after that, a lot of them that are still living who experienced the civil rights movement, the Jim Crow era, that's a ton of freaking trauma that's within inside of the DNA generationally, okay? Because now we're going back about 4 or 5 generations where they had to do things to survive, where they witnessed a lot of violence, where they experienced a lot of violence in their community. Okay, so this talked about community. A lot of times people don't think about that because it doesn't really affect their community. Okay, but for people of the African diaspora, and anybody who is highly melanated, over here in America and pretty much around the world, that caste system has been passed down. They have experienced neglect or abuse and seen violence in their community. Okay, so you take that on a grander scale, and of course, there's a lot of trauma stored in the DNA of Black people and people of African descent and indigenous Black people. And so why wouldn't it be passed down? You know what I'm saying? Each generation did the best they could to be able to get through the trauma that they were experiencing on a daily basis. Now, clearly, we have more freedoms today. We have more freedom of expression. And that's why we're finally to a point where we're starting to talk about healing, where we're starting to talk about gentle parenting, where we're even starting to talk about the trauma. If people are talking about the things that happen to them. That's why this is so important to me, because I feel like, and even as a young child, I always felt like I wasn't heard, I wasn't seen. I felt like I was just directed and dictated as to what to do, and I wasn't allowed to have feelings and express myself. So I feel like these things need to be talked about. I'm very open with my girls, and I've made a lot of mistakes as well, because before I got to a certain place of healing, I was just doing what was done to me. I was just acting out, or I was trying to replace certain things, where it's like, oh, I'm not going to be like my mom on this, and I would be really good in certain areas, but there were other areas that I was unable to be the best mom I wanted to be because I just didn't have the proper tools for that, But as I started to get into the healing and get to the other side, I was able to go and talk to my children very openly about certain things and explain to them, what it is that we're doing and breaking the cycle and things like that. And so, like my oldest daughter has a baby. I've got a grandbaby now. And that's all I think about is like, this baby doesn't have to know none of that shit. You know why? Because she knows, because I know it's going to have a different mom, a different grandmother, a different experience. And that's how we start to break generational trauma. And curses. And a lot of times there's not much you can do about the family that came before you. You can definitely do something about the family that comes after you. A lot of times the family that comes before you, it may be they just too set in their ways, number one. Or they may see the healing in you and decide to try something different. Okay. So I went off on one on that one, okay? So we talked about witnessing or experiencing violence. This is an example of trauma, generational trauma that can be passed down, neglect or abuse, and we put abandonment in there in your home or community. So we talked about the experience here in America and across the world and caste system for people of African descent, and being close to someone who dies by suicide. That can definitely be rough. Now, I didn't have to experience that. Um, I never experienced that, but I did know some people. I knew a couple of people who actually experienced a parent die from suicide, and that can be very traumatic. Okay, that can be something that causes a person to act out in certain different ways that that they feel like they weren't loved. It's kind of, it goes back to the neglect, okay, where you feel like somebody was so selfish that they just left you, like, or they feel like it's their fault, and this can then be transferred down to the next generation as well. Because I don't have very much experience with that one, I'm going to keep moving on. If you guys do, feel free to put it in the Q&A. Now, this last one here, this one right here shocks me, the numbers on this. Being sexually assaulted in childhood. This shit happens way too damn often, okay? Way too damn often. And this is definitely one of these secrets that it's like, why are we keeping this a secret? Okay. This is so damaging to the psyche, to the core, to the being of a person that it can completely fuck up your whole existence after that if you don't get to some sort of a healing place. And then on top of that, depending on the way that the person takes it, the person could then become the abuser themselves. And this is why that one's so dangerous to me. I would say that the physical and the sexual abuse are probably the most likely to be passed. Generational traumas are the most likely to be passed because without any help for it, whether that be anger management, whether that be learning, taking some parenting classes and learning how to deal with your stress and not taking it out on children, you will repeat that cycle. You're going to repeat that. Nobody sits there and thinks about how messed up it was for them when they were a kid, when that happened to them. When they're doing that stuff. With the sexual trauma, it can mess up the person's psyche so badly that they think that that's normal. And they then grow up to become the predator. Okay. Now, I experienced childhood sexual assault, and I also experienced um, losing my virginity to a rape. And that fucked up my world. I'm not going to lie. That completely misconstrued my perception about what an intimate relationship was supposed to be, what sexual relationships were supposed to be normal. And it really threw me into a whirlwind of depression and self medication and all kinds of other things that took years to be able to heal. And it took a long time, Now, I didn't become the predator, but I definitely was a rape victim for a long time until I began to cross the corner and become the survivor. A lot of times these traumas happen and they're not talked about. I did, like, that's the sad thing about it is we're not A lot of times when these things happen, it's some people have told. That's the thing. Some people have told a family member and they didn't protect them. Okay. So those are just tragic situations. And in those situations, when you don't protect the child and you leave the child in a situation where they're being harmed, this can also create some more trauma that escalates into all varieties of different ways. And in doing so, like I said, it just messes up the perception for a person. And so you may have somebody who, like I said, becomes the predator. You could have somebody that's overly protective too, because they feel like, oh my God, I don't want it to happen to my daughter. I don't want it to happen to my son. And I definitely want to bring boys up a lot because I know quite a few boys who are men now who, when they tell me the age they were when they lost their virginity, I'm shocked when they're saying things like 8 years old, 11 years old, and they tell me that this woman was like 20 something, 40 something. And I have to say, whoa, whoa, that was pedophilia. That was sexual assault. Did you tell anybody? And a lot of times this happens to boys just as much as it does girls, but for some reason it's not talked about. And it's like some secrets need to be told. I used to tell my girls that all the time when I know they were sisters and sisters keep secrets for each other, but I used to tell them some secrets need to be told. So if your sister tell you something and I need to know it, I would rather her be mad at you for a little while um than to have this major secret that should be told. So those are the ones that need to be talked about. Those are the ones that, feel free to do this with a therapist. Clearly, I'm not a therapist. I'm a spiritualist. I'm a holistic practitioner, but I do not have any credentials in psychotherapy. Let me put that disclaimer out there. I just am somebody, personal experience podcast, who has experienced a tremendous amount of trauma and who has gotten to the other side through a combination of things, through outside therapy, through my ancestors, spirit guides, and a lot of energy healing, okay, that it took for me to be able to talk about things like that. And so I bring this is part of my purpose to the world so that they can start to get some healing and start to break some of these generational cycles and curses. So yeah, that one right there, that one's near and dear to my heart because it can mess up a person in so many different ways. And the main thing for that is to just to get some help, to tell somebody, even if it happened a long time ago and you never told anybody, or you did, you told somebody and they didn't protect you as they should, you know, you deserve to have somebody in a safe space to be able to talk about that, whether it be with a therapist or a support group to be able to start the journey of healing on that as the victim to be the survivor. And very, very important stuff here. So, those are just examples of generational trauma. It can come in a variety of different ways. Those are more serious ones. And as you can see, that will mess a person up. That will mess a person up. And I don't sit here to claim to be perfect. I go more in detail in a lot of my writings about my story. But definitely I'm not perfect. It took me some time to understand that I was experiencing and acting out of my own trauma in different ways, that I had to go ahead and start to get some healing because I did not want to be I didn't want to raise my girls the way that I was raised. I think I did a better job. You have to ask them. They say I did, like they say they had a good childhood. There was some moments that was not so perfect and model-esque. But for the most part, I, did a lot with my girls. And then most importantly, I talk to my girls. I'm open with my girls. I'm honest with my girls. And I also let them know why we're doing this so that we could break generational cycles and we don't have to carry and pass that trauma on. And, we could try to heal our bloodline while we have the opportunity to, more so now than we ever did, than some of our ancestors ever did. Okay. Some of them just had to do the best they could to survive. And like I said, a lot of this is not to bash them, but it's to get to the place and the point where we can finally start to get some healing so that 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now, we understand the importance of the journey that we've been on and why it is so important to be open. Doesn't mean you got to come out here and do a podcast like I'm doing. Essentially, you want to be able to keep the family business in the family and for people to be able to do something about it. And if there's a child predator in the freaking family, make sure you keep the kids away from them. Don't be letting so and so babysit Unc so and so and pretending and letting him come over at the Thanksgiving table and disrespecting the child like that. So things have to change. And honestly, generational healing, generational trauma starts with ourselves. We can't go back and try to fight with people who haven't healed their own trauma, who's still experiencing their own trauma. But we can start to break the cycle, starting with ourselves. And that's what I've done. And I can see that happening in the generation that comes behind me, you know? And so hopefully you guys got something out of that. That was another loaded one. And this one was probably a little bit more personal. I shared more about me. But I do that intentionally because I believe that the people who listen to this are the people who are meant to listen to this. And I hope that it resonates with you guys. And once again, that is it for this episode. And I will see you on the next episode. Hopefully, we'll lighten up the convo a little bit and talk about how we're going to start to heal some of this generational trauma and the things that we'll actually do. All right, guys, that's it. Till the next episode. Peace.